Thank you so much, Sophie, for that lovely introduction. And thank you all so much for coming. It really means a lot to me that you would spend your evening here, so thank you. And before I get started, I also want to thank everyone at ATW, the staff and the weavers and the dyers, the volunteers, the board of directors. I'm so grateful for all of the support for bringing me here. It's been such a wonderful experience, so thank you all. Okay, so yes, hi, I'm Kayla Powers. I'm a textile artist. I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico in the Southwest United States. And this talk is called Entanglement, which is also the title of my exhibition. So the word entanglement for me is really about relationships. It's about the complicated, dynamic, symbiotic situations. And I love words that do a lot. And so entanglement is used metaphorically, but it's also literal. It's like a fiber adjacent word. And there's something called quantum entanglement, which is like a connection across time and space, which is like not what I'm talking about. So, so my plan is to spend these 30 minutes telling you about my practice and about my process and some of my ideas. And I'll show you some of the work that's in the exhibition and also what I have next, what I have coming up next. And then at the end, like Sophie said, there will be time for questions and comments. So I wanted to start with this meme. If you're not familiar with Adrienne Maree Brown, she is a writer. She wrote Emergent Strategies and Pleasure Activism. She's a social justice and climate activist, and she has an amazing Instagram account. And I love this image. It's just like seared into my brain. It has like the futility of trying to separate one thing from another thing. Like this is entanglement. It's complicated, it's messy, it's an intertwined relationship with and as the environment. Also, you can barely see, but it was like 10 p.m. My battery was on low and I was like scrolling on the internet. So I think it's important to share this because a lot of my work is important to me. It's very serious and these themes are very urgent, but I think it's good to have a sense of humor as often as we can. So I live in Santa Fe, a place known for its vernacular architecture. It's made of the earth. So adobe is the material and it's a combination of soil, water, and straw. And these structures, they tend to be human scale. And because they're made with the earth, there's a feeling that even when you're inside, you're still kind of outside. So this is new to me. I've only lived in Santa Fe for the last year, but it's something that I'm really enjoying getting to know. In Santa Fe, there are several different Native American tribes, Navajo, Hopi, and Tewa, among others, who have lived on and cared for the land for thousands of years. And there's a long history of contemporary practice of working with plants for natural dyeing in this region. So I'm listening to and learning from people whose roots in this region are very deep. So I do grow and forage the plants and dye materials that I work with as a way of cultivating a sense of belonging in and as nature. So when I'm foraging, I'm striving to work regeneratively. And I say regeneratively because I don't think sustainably is enough anymore. I think we have to move to this point where we're actually giving back and improving the situation for the future. I'm also working to understand local and traditional craft practices and to explore the relationship between the living world and the built environment. So this is an example of a palette that I created recently using flowers, leaves, seeds, roots, and an insect on linen and wool. And one other thing I'll say about working this way is that it's given me the gift of limitations, because in this moment, as you all know, we have access to quite literally anything at any time. You can summon it with a couple clicks on your phone. And so for me, setting this sort of like arbitrary limitations of natural materials and locally sourced materials has been very freeing in a lot of ways. So the first work I want to share with you is called Two Chains Made of Flowers. And I made this piece while I was studying at Cranbrook Academy of Art in Detroit, Michigan, where I graduated in 2023. At the time, we were writing our artist statement. And as a practice, we were challenged to write a one-word artist statement, which is something I would love to gift to all of you, to the many artists in the room. So it was a really challenging exercise, but it's been super helpful to have this one word to like root my practice in and to return to again and again. So for me, that word is connection. I'm interested in the ways that we're connected to each other, to craft, and to the land. So that's really what this piece was about. The literal links of that chain on the wall were formed in a way that was really like a satisfying connection. So I was weaving these tubes and then stitching them together such that the individuals were forming the whole. And then the piece on the ground, I'll show you another image of that, but it's the flowers and the plants that I had used to dye the wool that was in the chain. So it kind of acts as this like echo or sort of like shadow of the first piece. And so a little bit of the process of that. Sometimes I go into a project like with the exact color in mind and I go seeking it out in the wild. But other times I'll just sort of work with what's immediately available. And so I will just dye yarn as the plants are in season. And then here's a picture of my loom, all the little bundles of wool on the top. And I'm weaving in double weave technique on a floor loom here. So this is actually 2 layers of cloth on top of each other connected to form a loop. Here are my notes. And then here are a bunch of the plants used for dyeing and then eventually to form that chain on the ground. And so this piece, like I said, was created during grad school, and so it was subjected to critique, which, if you've ever experienced, can be quite intense. And especially for this work, this critique was really, it was a challenging one. And it actually really helped me because in some ways, the reaction to this work, it helped me see that, it doesn't need to be just like a purely good and positive thing. Like if the work stirs up feelings that are complicated, that's actually kind of a good thing and something to pay attention to. And so it's something that I've returned to quite often. Still processing that critique, clearly. So another dimension to my life is that I live at a Buddhist Zen center. So it's called Mountain Cloud Zen Center. And it's this beautiful little respite in the mountains on 25 acres. And my partner and I live on site full time, which gives us the opportunity to really get to know the property and the land. And so I'm learning a lot about land stewardship in the high desert and also about Buddhism. And something about Buddhism in an English-speaking country is that everything is a translation. So these texts that are being taught, they're translations. And given my interest in language and the way that textiles transmit language, it's something that I've been paying attention to. And so I made this piece using the same dried flowers from the first piece that I shared. I have this dye book of Native American dye recipes that rather than weight or volume, the recipes are given in, for example, 2 handfuls of flowers. And that has just really stuck with me, using the body to measure something, the proportions of the land being directly related to the body. So the word sutra, which comes from Sanskrit, meaning string or thread, is used in Buddhism to refer to texts or teachings. So like a famous example is the Heart Sutra. And the word suture from Latin, which means seam or sewing, is literally used to close a wound and heal the body. So the etymological origins are different from each other, but they both refer to thread. And this piece is not meant to like answer something, but rather to be an exploration of the interconnected meanings of these words, an opportunity to engage with the land, a temporary and restorative act, and a gesture of reciprocity rooted in the deep connection and oneness between the land and the body. I also just really appreciate this type of like temporary and ephemeral work that I suppose you could commodify this if you were really clever, but it would be very hard to. So it's not made for the marketplace. And that is just something that feels very freeing as an artist to put your attention towards every now and again. And so when I made this, I was using these 2 handfuls to create the length and then the width. And also it's the proportions of my own body, so my own length and width. And so part of stewarding the land is tending the garden. And I think the garden, like an art practice, requires a physical presence. It can be sort of a devotional practice. It's daily, reciprocal, in exchange with the living world. And there's so much I want to say about gardening. I think like in some ways it occupies the same space as textiles. Like it's stereotypically female. It's often relegated to decorative, domestic, but it also shares some of the same language. So when we think of planting seeds in the ground in these tidy little rows, we call that sowing seeds, S-O-W. And of course, when you're stitching a quilt, it's S-E-W, sewing. Also, we have heirloom seeds, which are seeds that we save generation to generation. And in the same way, a quilt can be an heirloom, which we pass down from generation to generation. So this piece was made with that in mind. It's full of seeds and it's dyed with plants. It's printed and painted and beaded and embroidered, and it's meant to express a relationship to a moment in time and place. The North End was a neighborhood in Detroit. And so that piece hangs on the wall in front of these little dashes that I call seed stitches. And I made the paint using plants, and then I applied it directly to the wall in the museum where that piece was exhibited. And so here's a detail shot. A material that I use often is the silk organza. So that panel on the right there that you can see through. I really love this material. It's transparent enough that it allows whatever is behind it to almost like become a graphic part of the surface. So I love that. This over here on the left side is it's screen printed, silk screened with a thickened mordant paste and using pressed plants. Here's another detail shot. You can see a little pocket there of silk organza that contains all the scraps from producing this piece. So I just kind of saved the scraps and put them in a little pocket and then sew that in. You can see the seed stitches peeking out the bottom there. So another aspect of the garden that has made its way into my work is the trellis. I'm just obsessed with trellises. They're just perfect. As a support structure, I think it like literally demonstrates this relationship between the living world, which in this case are the plants, climbing up this built environment of the trellis. And they also really remind me of weavings, you know, the grid, all these right angles, these little boxes. And so this is a piece that I wove directly thinking about the trellis, but also considering connections and relationships. And so again, I utilized the double weave technique. And then I figured out a way to get rid of the warp threads in the spaces in between. It was really fussy, super time consuming, but ultimately something interesting about it and maybe worthwhile. And so here's a little peek at the process. You can see my notes have gotten a little tidier since grad school. And then on the loom there, you can see all the warp threads still in it, so they come out at the end. Okay, and so one of the dyes I used to make this piece is cochineal. Are you familiar with cochineal? Okay, wow, a lot of heads nodding, that's great. So cochineal is an insect, and it's a parasitic insect, and it lives on the prickly pear cactus. And so it's the white sort of fuzz on there is this like external, almost like a spider's web, and then the cochineal sucks the juice out of the cactus. And I want to tell you a little bit about this as part of as a way of illustrating why natural dyes are so cool. So for one thing, there's tension because it's a living thing. I pick it up and I crush it up. And so like that's intense. But people have been doing this. Indigenous people in Mexico have been cultivating cochineal for thousands of years. And so when European colonizers came to Mexico in the 1500s, when the Spanish came, they saw this color that was being produced from this insect, and they were excited because it's amazing. But they started to export it, and eventually it became the most valuable export of the Spanish Empire. So the Catholic Church got their hands on cochineal and started dyeing their robes red with it. Then the military got their hands on it and started dyeing their jackets with it. And so this color came to represent power and wealth in the Spanish Empire. And because of Spain's control at the time, it was traded globally and became one of the first truly global commodities. So cochineal found its way into Ottoman silks, to Chinese textiles, Persian textiles. So this one dye, this one color, this little insect shaped the visual culture of the time, which was like the mid-1500s. So it's just an example of like the way that color is political and has these, just carries so much meaning with it. And so here is some more cochineal dyed samples. On the left is some nettle and ixtal yarn, and then on the right is some silk and wool and cotton samples. So nowadays, cochineal produces more pink and purple than it traditionally used to, which was more of a crimson red. And I don't know why. I think someone is doing the research. It would be fascinating to know. But I do love to imagine what the Catholic Church would be like if they were wearing magenta robes. And the army too, for that matter. And so here I am. Every time I need to delete this picture, but I just can't. I need to show you. This is my studio troll mode, holding up my fish. I'm so proud. So, okay, well, we're going to go on a little bit of a side quest here, which is to share another ongoing part of my practice, which is called chromatic ecology. And chromatic ecology is an exploration of seasonally and geographically specific color, regeneratively foraged and cultivated, and applied to locally sourced fiber and transformed into pigment. And that's the language I use for grant applications, but ultimately it's local color. So it's getting to know a place through color and documenting it in different ways. So after I dye fabric and yarn in the dye pot, I transform the remaining color into pigment. So the image on the right is pigment drying on cloth. And actually, I'll be teaching this process right here in this room in just a couple days. Yeah, so for me, this has been a way to understand ecology through color and also to cultivate community through craft. So this is an image in my studio in Santa Fe of a botanical watercolor workshop. And you can see on the front there of the table, all of these pieces of fabric with the pigment drying on them. They're just a temporary, part of the process. Eventually that will get scraped off and ground up, and I'll just wash the fabric and start again. But I think they're so cool. And so I've been working with the local printer, and he'll scan the fabric, and we've been making these prints with them. So they've become this series of pigment circles. Chromatic ecology is a way to root my practice in place. So again, utilizing those arbitrary limitations of locally sourced color on natural materials. And here are some samples of dyed fabric and yarn, and paint samples and plant drawings. And this is another example. This is a palette in Detroit that I made, modeled off of one of the dye charts made by the Navajo and Hopi weavers in a book that I'll reference at the end. And chromatic ecology has also been a really incredible way to activate the social practice side of my work. So in April 2024, I was invited to the Detroit Institute of Arts to lead a community art project where we made paint with local plants and then created these 3 mural-sized paintings. I made labels with each plant name and color, and then I drew out the shapes on the canvas, and I put all of the shapes in, or the labels in the shapes. Can you kind of see what's going on there? And then participants were invited to come up and choose a color and then go back to the mural and sort of like forage for it, and then to paint in that shape with that color. And then the paintings were displayed on the exterior of the building, free for all to see throughout the summer. A collaborative art piece made by the community, who could then go to this world-renowned museum and see their work and point to their shape and their contribution. not in the museum, but on the museum. Next time in the museum. So another example of the garden finding its way into my work is the hose. And, every day I would just like water the garden and then wind it up, sometimes putting more care into it than others. But I just love that it's this like quotidian object, this like daily practice. It's so familiar. It's sort of like ever-changing sculpture. And so I started to make these tubes inspired by the hose. This piece is part of the exhibition here in the other room. In the exhibition, it's categorized as a rope. So I'll let you guys figure that one out. It's made with silk organza, that same material that I love. And it's also stuffed with a year's worth of scraps from my studio. So in my studio, I just have like baskets and jars of little fabric and yarn scraps that I never would throw away. And so eventually I just stuff them back into here. And so there's also this sort of like conceptual biomimicry thing happening where it's like compost a little bit, like something, becoming something else was exciting to me. And actually, the first time I made a tube, it was as an artist in residence at Brett Create in Breckenridge, Colorado, which was just in 2024. And so I was there for a 4-month residency, and I was basically making a like sketch a day in response to place. So I was walking around, observing the landscape, taking pictures, just sort of like observing the ways that we intersect and diverge, and noticing new forms and balance and light. And something I'm recognizing about my practice is that it's really helpful for me to have a jumping off point, like something that's grounded in reality. So I think of these works as abstract, but it's nice for me to have something to point to, or at least somewhere to start from. So eventually I found a tube, and I don't even have my reference photo for this, but like safe to say it was a hose. And eventually I made more than 50 of these, which I called the series Essayettes. And the name comes from the poet Ross Gay, who wrote a book called The Book of Delights. You know it, it's so good. Also a sort of like daily journal observation of the world around him. And he was talking about the word essay as in like the piece of writing, which comes from the French word essayer, meaning to try. And so there was something really beautiful about this, like just like a daily try. And essayettes meaning just like a small version of that. And a lot of these have eventually been scaled up or elaborated on, like the tube, for example. I keep returning to these studies. So I shared the trellis and I shared the tubes. And another form I'm really enjoying exploring is the net. So a net is something used for survival, for fishing, for collecting food, gathering. It's like everything I love about textiles. It's very simple. It's just string and knots, which would have been made from locally sourced materials like plants and, like animal tendons and hair and whatever was locally available. So as part of this research, I've been reading The Carrier Bag Theory of Human Evolution by the journalist Elizabeth Fisher, and then reworked by the writer Ursula K. Le Guin as The Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction, which maybe you're more familiar with. If not, we'll talk about it at the end. It's just so wonderful. And if we've talked in the last week, I've probably been telling you about this. I'm just so excited about it right now. The theory is that the traditional view of human evolution was focused on tools of aggression, like a spear, a tool of aggression, but the primary, like that was thought of as the primary driver of development. But Fisher's theory is that it wasn't a tool of aggression, but rather a carrier bag or a basket used for transporting food, which was the first significant cultural device that led to our evolution. So early humans' ability to collect, gather, carry, allowed us to share resources and, importantly, to shape our social structures and our cognitive development. So it wasn't man versus nature, it was like all of us within the family of things. So I think in the same way that gardening and foraging connects us with our ancestors and what it means to be human, I think the form of a net, the process of weaving a net, can do something similar. And again, here I'm presenting this as if the research came first, but usually it doesn't, and here it didn't. It was more so the case that I started weaving another piece similar to the trellis, but this time it wasn't double weave. It was this other structure that felt really exciting. And I just kept doing it. And I was like thinking through making, not reading and then making. But the grids were accumulating. And after that, I went to a residency in Norway. So this was in May. I went to Air Green, which is a textile artist residency. It was on a farm and an inland fjord. And I had planned to work on other things. Like I had plans, but I got there and there's this huge loom, and we were calling it the Rolls Royce of looms because it's like the nicest one, and it was so big. And so I just ended up weaving. And there too, I was dyeing with local plants, so practicing chromatic ecology. Those are some dandelion and nettle. And then I started to stitch these panels of grids together and photograph them outside. I don't know if you can see, there's kind of like two pieces stitched together. So that was a small change, but I still wasn't really thinking of them as nets. Like I still thought they might be trellises, but then when I started to see them on the water and like in the air, then I was convinced. So to be honest, like that's where the research began. Also because a couple of the residents I was there with mentioned this, the essay to me, to Le Guin's essay, The Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction. And it really aligned with my art and life philosophies. So that is really where that form of research began. So at the end of the month-long residency, I had made several of these pieces, and it was exciting to like fold them twice like that. And the layering and unevenness of the grids felt interesting. Also just like resisting the urge to spread it out and be as big as possible, and instead to like focus on the density felt like a new move. And because that loom was so big, I was able to make these single pieces that were large enough to be folded twice. So here's one of the finished works that's currently being exhibited at Ona House in New York. And there's a close-up of that. And that brings us to Australia. What a beautiful place you guys live in. Look at this. So I've been here for 3 weeks now, walking, observing, weaving. Here at ATW, I've been working with Heather in the dye lab, creating these local colors. So that's native cherry on the left and eucalyptus on the right, both on wool, which has found its way onto the loom and into the gallery already. So there's a smaller piece right when you walk in on the right against the wall. That's that piece that you're seeing being woven there. And this palette, you guys, what a crazy palette. I just can't get over it. Heather says it's like the 70s. It's like so true, so groovy. And so the larger net in the center of the space was mainly made ahead of time, but was assembled here, actually right here in this room on a table. But one of the panels I created using the leftover weft from various tapestries woven here. So you can see if you can find that one in here in the net among the others. So here's an iPhone photo of the installation. These are the ropes. And then the last sort of piece of the exhibition is the knots. And these are brand new, so I won't really say too much about them yet, but these are kind of like sketches or studies. And eventually they'll become dimensional sculptural pieces, I think anyways. And there is actually one in there that you can look at and kind of see what the plan is. But I'm thinking about like how it is that textiles transmit information, what does it mean to know something somatically? And knots also just feel so rich metaphorically. And these were all painted with plants and cochineal. Okay, oh yeah, and so the last thing that I'll share is that when I return to Santa Fe in 2 weeks, I'll be making work for an exhibition coming up at the Saugatuck Center for Arts in Saugatuck, Michigan, and it's titled Flourish. So I'm making 30 wildflowers that are local to Saugatuck. So I'm starting by doing these sketches, I'm researching, planning out the fabric to dye, and so here are the first 12 that I made of those. Okay, and this is my visual bibliography. So take a look. Agnes Martin, Lucy Lepard, Weaver Birds, Ross Gay. That's the end. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening. I think the plan is that we have time for questions, and Michelle has this cool little mic.
That way the live stream can hear you too. Yes, so that's for people who are listening in internationally. If anyone has any questions, we've got any, Valerie, you can
Kayla, have you had connections with any of the Australian dyers, of course, outside the workshop? Because we have a very strong history of natural dyeing in Australia. It was very big in the 70s and is having a resurgence now. So we have some very good people that have experimented with all our Australian plants.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you. I feel aware of some people who are working here with natural dyes, but if you have recommendations, like let's talk afterwards. That would be so great. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Valerie. Anyone else?
Hi, Kayla. That was fantastic. So
you.
inspiring and beautifully prepared and presented. Can you talk a little bit about mordants and just the longevity and lifespan of working with natural plants and their fixing capacities?
Yes, yeah.
And natural light,
Right, yes. You must use a mordant when you're natural dyeing. The mordant, the Latin word for mordant is to bite. So you think of the mordant as like biting onto the fiber, and then the dye is going to attach to the mordant. So it's like this sort of bridge between the dye and the fiber. I typically use alum and iron, but here I've gotten to work with copper, which Heather has introduced me to, which has been so exciting. And maybe we're going to use titanium too. I'm not sure. Heather is like the dye witch, so I'm learning a lot right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, we can definitely talk more about mordants. But yeah, it's of course a necessary part for increasing the longevity of the color, the light fastness, the wash fastness of color. Yeah.
Heather, I'm going to ask you to say a few words about mordants because you do know a lot.
Well, yeah, I work with the same ones as Kayla. So those mineral salts that make the dyes really bond to the fiber. So there's a whole world of layering them and exploring them. So I'm always learning new things, but it's something that's become really important to my practice and for keeping the color strong for as long as we can.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because people are very fixated on dyes being dye fast.
Yeah.
But we accept that jeans fade. Everyone
Yes.
loves faded jeans.
Yes.
But we're so used to chemical colors that we think that everything should just be completely dye fast and not change. And it's a fault if it changes.
Yes.
But I
Amen.
think if we were to think of natural dyes more like flowers in their seasons and they're full and bright and colorful, and then they die and fade and go to brown.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, it's something to think about.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's been an interesting part about positioning work in the fine art world is we're really used to we're thinking about conservation of these pieces. How long is it going to last? And if it's, in a collection, how do we preserve it? I don't know what to say about it. It's not going to last forever. It's gonna last forever. So yeah, I think the can kind of embrace that for being what it is. Yeah, the better.
You're amazing.
Oh my God.
That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Your practice is beautiful. And I just want to say, like, what an honor for us to view your work. I think your work is so rooted, like, and you're very, you know what your practice is and what your outcome is. And I liked you were talking about sowing seeds. I think sowing seeds is also like a sowing seeds of good to help people. Like you're sharing, like you're sowing seeds just to people who aren't artists as well, of like, yeah, where we live and what's below our feet when we walk. I think it's really beautiful and special. So thank you.
That's so nice. Thank you.
I was just going to ask a question about the idea of moving away from, sort of fast dyes that will remain ever. And you did show an early work a work that was quite ephemeral. And I'm just wondering whether what other works you've done in that space, and is when you were talking about moving away from sustainability to regenerative, is that kind of where the work will situate itself in that kind of ephemeral space?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think when I'm talking about regenerative versus sustainable, I'm mostly talking about my process, but you're right in that, like, why couldn't the work itself be a regenerative piece? Sophie was sort of talking about the sowing seeds. There's a piece I'm working on now that's this collaborative, it's for the show that I was talking about at the end, where I've invited the community to create these sewn fabric seeds. The idea being that people will go in and take one with them. So it's this like act of exchange. So in a way, like that feels like kind of at least the idea of being, a regenerative artwork, and that like the idea is spreading. But yeah, in terms of like literally, yeah, I want there to be more of that. And like that suture piece felt like a really exciting place to explore. Like if that's full of seeds, which it was, like there were seeds in there, like what will sprout from that? And can our art actually do good? Like not just like do less harm, but can it do good? So it's something I'm still working on.
Who else? Anyone at the front? Hand? No? Any other takers? I might ask you a little bit, Kayla, about what else you're going to be doing now. We've reached the milestone of your exhibition, and we're, like Sophie said, we're very grateful that you've made new work while you're here and taken into the piece aspects of Australia that'll be there now, woven in, literally. What will you do for the rest of your time here?
Yeah, what will I do? I'm really looking forward to just getting into the studio, sitting at my desk in front of the sewing machine and just kind of seeing what happens. I'll also do some more foraging and things, but part of like thinking through making means that I like just have to have my hands moving, doing something, and then the ideas will come. Yeah, it's been really a lot. I was telling Nicole, like the last piece went into the exhibition this morning. So I'll check in with you in a couple days about what's next.
We'll let you have a little rest after tonight. Yeah.